Welcome, everybody, to the latest episode of the Union Federation podcast here on the Fandom Podcast Network. Of course, the Union Federation is the show that covers all the happenings in the Star Trek and Orville universes here on the Fandom Podcast Network. We've got a great show for you this week. We're going to be talking about Star Trek, Strange New Worlds, and just having a lot of fun. It was a very fun episode of Strange New Worlds, and I can't fly the ship alone and talk about Strange New Worlds alone, much less serve divine cuisine like this episode did. So I've got to bring in, first and foremost, our top-notch science officer. We let her have the weapons helm, and she's a bit of a chameleon. You never know which version of her you're going to get week to week, but we love her anyway. It is the lovely Haley Stoddard.
Hello. I am so excited to be here. I'm ready. Captain Pike has poured me a drink, and just be careful to not read anything wrong.
Now, Haley, you've got a very strong red theme going on this week. You got the curtains, the hair, and your drink all matching up there. So, but somebody who I know rarely sees red because he's such a good guy. But I'll tell you what, it gets really ugly when they don't clean up their mess on the conference room table. It's our top-notch security officer, Mr. Kevin Reitzel.
Don't test me, Wagner. Don't test me.
I knew I should have picked up those donut crumbs.
Definitely.
I so sympathize with that scene.
Well, we have a great episode ahead, which also means that we are going to have what we call spoiler alerts. We are going to be diving deep into the latest episode of the Union Federation podcast with Strange New Worlds season 2, episode 5, Charades. Are you guys' charades skills up to snuff for this episode?
No, I am not good at charades. I don't even know what they are. Please explain.
It's when you can't speak and you pantomime things and people trying to guess what you're pantomiming.
Wait. Hey, you never played charades before?
Probably not since high school.
Okay. All right.
Come on, it is a very important Earth tradition. Come on now.
No.
Well, guys, we are Yeah, that's how that works. Guys, we are going to go straight into things. So let's warp into our episode synopsis. That is right. It is time for the Admiral's Log. Security Chief Reitzel, our counselor Amy Nelson is not with us this week as she's preparing for this little thing called Star Trek Las Vegas. And so I can't blame her for this, but would you care to read the Admiral's Log for this week?
Sure, be more than happy to. All right. While exploring archaeological ruins near Vulcan, Spock and Chapel are nearly killed when they encountered a portal inhabited by the Kirkovians, a powerful higher dimension alien race. The Kirkovians heal Chapel, but accidentally reconfigure Spock's physiology to full-blooded humans, just as he is preparing to meet his mother Amanda Grayson and his fiancée T'Pring and her bigoted parents, T'Pril and Sevek, for a ritual on Vulcan involving telepathy. Spock does not tell T'Pring, assuming her feelings must be spared. Chapel and Pike assist as Spock tries to regain his emotional control, while Pike contacts the aliens to restore Spock to normal with little initial success. The ritual goes poorly at first, culminating in Spock losing his temper and calling out T'Pril's bigotry. The telepathic rituals reveals T'Pring's restrained relations with her parents, while Spock gains insight into her mother's love for him and hope that he gains acceptance in Vulcan society. Chapel convinces the Krakowians to return Spock to normal by confessing to them her feelings for him. Offended that Spock hid his condition from her, T'Pring puts their relationship on hiatus. Later, Spock admits to Chapel that he has feelings for her, and they kiss.
Okay, in honor of the Kryptonians, for the rest of this episode, Haley, you're going to be red. Kevin, you're going to be silver and black.
Nice, nice, nice.
I'm down.
Yeah, and you feel like we're being watched here because it's time to give our first reactions to this episode. Haley, would you care to give us what your first thoughts to this episode were?
Yeah. So I just watched it, actually, finished up just a little bit ago. I am so glad there was so much humor in this episode because I really wanted to, like, take some Vulcan, fighting scenes with T'Pril, not gonna lie. And I definitely would not want to marry into that kind of family. But I thought this was great. I really loved this exploration of Spock and not just like his human emotions and that side of things, but getting him to see him as a human and experiencing all the turmoil that comes with basically being a teenager, I guess, is the best way to put it. And Lon kind of puts it that way. So I really enjoyed this episode. I thought it was great, and I have some more thoughts we'll get to in a minute.
Kevin, do we call it Spock human puberty for him?
I love it when certain tropes in Star Trek return, and that is the body switching or the something not right with the character, whether it's done seriously or funny, like this one was. And I thought it was a clever way on how they did it. There's a species that is higher evolved and have powers to do something, and it's a vessel to explain a fun story here, which in the end is also trying to explore the relationship between Spock and Chapel, as well as whatever it is that Spock has with T'Pring and that family. So I thought that was interesting, but it was just fun too to just kind of see the crew overall kind of like taking some downtime and relaxing, and then having not only the relationship between Spock and Chapel explored, but also Chapel as well. Jess did a great job as this character, and we're learning more about her and her background. So I did enjoy this episode.
Yeah, I had a ton of fun with this episode. There were several laugh out loud moments in it for me. Ethan Peck is growing on me very fast as Spock, to the point where he's pushing Leonard just a little bit here, guys. That's at least personal for me because he's given us a different kind of Spock. But this was a fun episode. But to see what I really liked about this one was we got a lot of interpersonal relationships worked on in this episode. Whether we're talking about Spock with Chapel, Spock with T'Pring, Spock with his mom, and even one of the things I really liked about within this episode too was the crew being a little bit more interpersonal as well. Kind of how Pike was trying to be like more of a mentor to Spock and trying to help him adjust that. But with even the little moments with the rest of the crew in the bar or in the lounge, and those moments are when Chapel or Ortegas and Uhura go to the aliens to try to get things fixed. That's a great moment. And it was all those wonderful interpersonal moments in this episode that worked really well for me. And speaking of things that worked well, once again, it's time to talk about the cast of this this episode. The cast shined, including some amazing guest stars. Kevin, was there anybody who stood out for you this first?
Well, definitely Jess Bush as Nurse Chapel. She really had some good moments in this. When she gives that heartfelt speech to the Krakowians, if I'm remembering that name right, I thought that was really, really cool. And I also liked, I'm trying to see it here, Mia Kirshner returning as Amanda Grayson, Spock's mom. I've always liked Mia Kirshner, and I thought that she was really good in this, and I like to see even more scenes with her, like that. So,
Haley, what about you? Who was the standout for you in the cast this week?
I think one of my favorite moments was when La'an was talking with Spock, right? After he flips out on Kirk. Uh, she's talking to him and like you're experiencing all these emotions and all these feelings and you're hungry all the time. Like you just snack all the time. And he kind of looks at her and he's like, "Yeah, but also sadness and loneliness and other things." And he just glances her up and down and she's like, "Oh, don't even think about it." That was I think that was great. Between that and one of the other standouts was when, La'an, Uhura, Ortegas, and number one are trying to talk to Spock and saying, like, "No, you talk like this. And you raise an eyebrow and you don't move any muscles in your face." I think it was so nice to see the crew doing things that aren't necessarily their job. And so it was really nice to see all these fun interactions. So I don't necessarily think there was anybody that really stood out simply because this episode was so Spock centered and so Nurse Chapel centered. It really, they were kind of the ones, so I don't want to call them out, but I think everybody else really shined in this downtime kind of stuff that they were doing in this episode.
All good points. For me, it's obviously this was Ethan Peck's episode, and he was phenomenal. We'll talk about that in a little bit. Kevin, I'm with you. I'm a huge Mia Kirshner fan. I loved her on the show Defiance back in the day on the Sci-Fi Channel when she was on that. I'm always happy to see her on screen, and I think she plays Amanda Grayson incredibly well. Alora Patnick as Chapril. I mean, talk about doing a character you love to hate. She did a phenomenal job, and of course, I'm always happy to see Gia Sandhu back as T'Pring, because I think her relationship with Spock is always very interesting and brings out some very interesting sides of Spock as well. And of course, with Jess Bush as Christine Chapel, we know my feelings for her, so it was great to see her.
I did want to touch on something that in the scene, what was it? Haley had mentioned where the crew of the Enterprise was kind of teaching Spock how to Spock again.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought that was a really funny scene because it was in a way kind of telling people, if you're going to be Vulcan, this is how you got to be.
Yeah.
It's a very stereotypical, but it works. So I thought that was funny.
Mm-hmm.
Well, with that, guys, make sure you've taken your vitamins. Very important this week. But it's time to activate the transporter and enter our away missions. Okay, guys, away mission 1 is where we cover some of the more important plot points of the week. And we've got a few this week, including, first and foremost, Spock's human condition. Obviously, the big plot point and story point of this week was Spock being changed to human. It was a phenomenal performance, in my personal opinion, by Ethan Peck. I think he did a wonderful job with this. But we talked a little bit about it in our thoughts about the episode, but how do you guys feel about how Ethan Peck portrayed Spock in this, and how they handled Spock's human, all of a sudden, just wide range of human emotions overtaking him? Haley, I'm going to start with you on this.
I can imagine for Ethan Peck that this must have been kind of weird on one side, because he's been playing Spock now for a while, to bring in all of these strong emotions and feelings to this character, right? And allowing him to experience those. But I think he did do a phenomenal job of still being Spock while also being Spock who, rather than controlling his emotions, he's overcome by them. And he's overcome by some that I guess I never really thought that Vulcans didn't experience, like hunger. He's like, "What is this feeling? Why am I hungry?" And, Dr. Mbenga's like, "Well, that can cause other emotions." Spock's getting hangry, essentially. And it was nice to see, and it was also really fun to see and weird, like when he smiles and then when he finally starts laughing and then he just keeps laughing and everyone else is like, okay, we're done, the joke's dead now, and he continues to laugh. I think was really wonderful because Spock's never really been able to fully explore this human part of him. And, later, I don't know if we'll talk about it, but later I love the moment when he shares with his mom of like how difficult it was for her to be a human on Vulcan and to have all these emotions and have all these feelings and never have gone through something like Kolinar to suppress them rather than have them control you, to be amongst all these people who were criticizing her and whatnot, and to love a Vulcan who, yes, loves her, but can't love her in the way that a human can. And that appreciation, I think, was so well rounded in juxtaposition to the earlier parts of the episode where he's just really struggling. I love the aspect of he's like, well, I have nasal suppressants, and that's new. I mean, we've heard the concept that Vulcans don't like the smell of humans. Apparently, we smell funky, but nasal suppressants is like a new concept of like, okay, I can't really smell anything when he's learning how to cook from Captain Pike. And Captain Pike's talking about herbs and use fresh herbs. Don't ever, don't not use fresh herbs. They just lend something to it. And I know we'll get to it, but later, he's smelling bacon and he's just like, what is this? And, Vulcans, they're vegetarians, so they don't eat meat. So that was fun to see. But I loved this idea of him being able to explore that and the subtle ways they made him look different. His hair's kind of curly. It's a little disheveled. The sideburns, are a little not as pronounced, I guess, aside from his ears. I think that was wonderful. Just these little subtle touches that this isn't Spock as we know him was great.
Mr. Reitzel, your thoughts on Spock this week?
I find it interesting that throughout Trek history, that Spock is half human and half Vulcan. Yet he seems to embrace the Vulcan side a lot more than the human side, and that when the human side creeps in, it's like this huge burden, And I'll be honest with you, I've always had an issue with that. I would like to have seen, Spock, in previous incarnations, kind of accept his human side a little bit more, and maybe have fun with the character. But I guess he's more entertaining and interesting when he's not human. So I like the fact that we got this all human side of Spock, and that the way that he would respond to certain things. He showed his frustration, which I thought was kind of interesting because it was kind of human tropey, the way that he responded with his anger a little bit more and his frustration a little bit more. I would have liked to have seen a little more genuine humor instead of accidental humor. Finding out that Spock has this humor from his human side to come out a little bit more. But I guess it's funny to also see him show these losing my human emotion control moments and stuff like that. So it's nice to see him bring that out, and seeing Ethan express that and express the human side was entertaining. But I would have liked to have seen a little bit more of, I guess, his human side not shown as a burden, not shown as a bad thing, but more of a good thing. And the one time it really kind of felt like that was when he gave Chapel the hug. And I wanted to see a little bit more of that. But overall, I did enjoy those.
I think for me with this episode, first of all, Ethan Peck was phenomenal in this episode. Like I said a little bit ago, he is the direction he's taking Spock, which is his own unique direction, putting his own twist on it, I think is just adding to the character of Spock in Star Trek history. And I think he's making himself, I'm not putting him at Nimoy level yet, but he is making himself very important within the lore of Spock, and I love seeing that happen. To your point, Kevin, I agree with you, but I also think that part of the point of this episode was to help Spock maybe understand and accept his humanity more by making him fully human. And I think that was something that evolved throughout the episode as he was just basically overwhelmed at first, but as his emotions were ringing true, and you see where he is actually standing up somewhat for not only his mother but for his own humanity at the end. At the end, when he reveals that he was human the entire time of the ceremony, and really just how important that was to him, and how important his mother was to him, and it also gave him some insight to a lot of other things. But it's Ethan Peck. I don't think he ever played the humanity, at least in this episode, as this burden, other than his fear of he wanted to please T'Pring and not mess up this very important ceremony. And he felt like, I can't do this. I'm human. This is a Vulcan thing. I can't do Vulcan right now. And with that, I just think this is a great episode for Spock understanding himself better, and maybe finding a little bit more balance within himself between his Vulcan and human side. And I'm going to be curious to see how things go forward with the events of this episode as well. But it was quite intriguing. But that is going to bring us to, yes, Haley?
Well, before we move on, I want to talk about something that Kevin mentioned of how, Spock, that you wish that he would have explored, his human emotions and that human side of him more throughout Trek. If you think about it, he grew up on Vulcan. And he's going to, in this episode, when he does the mind meld with his mom chooses a memory of the first time that he was ever asked to play with other children. And so you have to think about this person who, he's half human, half Vulcan, and he's growing up on Vulcan, where the only person that's human is his mother. And if any diplomats or anything come and visit, those are the only other humans he ever encounters. And so what are you going to want to model after and model your behavior and grow up to become and strive to become is someone who fits in with the rest of the society that you're growing up on. If he'd grown up on Earth, he would probably embrace his human part more than his Vulcan part, because again, that was acceptable, that was comfortable, that was okay. That side of him was embraced, as opposed to on Vulcan, he wasn't necessarily embraced for either side, but he was wanting to fit in, and he was wanting to be able to be accepted by those he knew and by the society that he grew up in. And so in order to do that, he had to fit into this Vulcan part. And that, I think that's probably why he leans more on, I'm not going to allow my human parts to come out as much, simply because of his upbringing.
I'd like to retort to that,
Sure.
because I'm not asking us to rewrite, Spock history or whatever, but this episode made me think deeper about the relationship between Spock's parents.
Mm-hmm.
Why didn't Spock spend summer times on Earth? Or the cheesy stuff when you have, like, a mom from one country and maybe a father from another country. You expose them to both different cultures, basically.
Mm-hmm.
And you want your child to know both sides. And it doesn't feel like that was a very even way. Of course, Spock's more interesting when he's, half alien, and he explores that, and he's, logical, and, we've become to love this beloved character for these reasons. But this episode made me think about that. I'm like, why didn't he get exposure and learn more about human customs and spend more time there? That's when Star Trek has always been more fascinating and interesting with fans when it makes you think about that type of thing, and you're wondering, like, why wasn't that a thing? And that's kind of tied into something I'll talk about when we talk about the culture clash, so to speak, that we have coming up.
Mm-hmm.
Real quick, an answer to your thought about that, Kevin. I think it's because of the position of his father, with Sarek being this ambassador, and probably dictating he was how important it was for Spock to become
No,
a Vulcan.
I get that. I
Yeah.
understand that. But if this is a marriage that is a balanced marriage, Spock should have gotten more human contact.
But I don't think it's a balanced marriage, too. I think,
Yeah.
and I think that's leading into some of the issues that are between Spock and Sarek that they refer to in this episode, because Spock
Yeah.
made the Starfleet decision instead of going the more Vulcan path that Sarek wanted him to go. But guys, let's talk about our next topic, because family matters. Family matters was a big part of this episode, whether it was the relationship with Spock and his mother and some understanding that probably gets down between them. But can we also talk about the future mother-in-law from hell?
Ooh.
And what I loved about this, before I let you guys take over, is I love the fact that you saw T'Pring, who is this very Vulcan, but still her mother was even too much for her. And she's like, I need a break from her. So I thought they did a great job with a lot of this stuff. But Kevin, I'm gonna start with you here. What were your thoughts on the family matters of this episode of Strange New Worlds?
I have a note here that says Vulcans are dicks. Because we had a perfect example of this, not just the family members who are prejudiced and such, but you look through the history of Star Trek, and Vulcans can be dicks, basically. Even looking at the guy that is the Vulcan that is going over Chapel's application, it's a dick, And I was looking, and I'm like, like I said, Star Trek makes you think about things, right? I started thinking about Star Trek First Contact, those Vulcans that showed up there with Professor, or with was it Cochrane?
Yeah, Cochrane.
They're in First Contact. I'm like, okay, that's a good example of Vulcans not being dicks. But I'm like, how did it get to that point to where most of the Vulcans we've seen? I mean, even looking, Star Trek 2009, when young Spock is doing his thing, and he's got the Spock bullies, or he's got the bullies on Spock, and he has to fight back. And there's also the scene in later, I don't know if it's that same movie, but Spock is being, Spock is calling out the Vulcan council or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
They're being dicks. I mean, there's a long line of Vulcan dicks, basically. And this is another example of that. And I'm going to call out T'Pring, too. At the end, when she's upset that he wasn't forthcoming with her about his condition, and she's using that as a crutch to call off or put this relationship on hold. What about, just apologizing? If Spock were to say, look, I apologize, that would have gone a long way. Would she? But I don't think she was willing to accept that. So I don't know if it's. I had an issue with the reason for her calling off their relationship. I don't know if she was completely bought in. Maybe Spock seemed like a candidate that might please her mom, but then maybe during this process that we're looking at this picture here, maybe she's still not she doesn't approve of Spock, and maybe that means a little more to T'Pring than she's willing to admit. Maybe she's not being completely honest with her situation, and therefore she's using this moment of Spock not being open with her, and Spock saying, I didn't want to, give you my burden for what I was going through. It was a little too, I don't know, selfish on her part too, to not really try to understand what he was going through. She was more putting, her things on him, and I get you had to come to a point to where you need to call off these characters' relationships so you can explore the Spock and Chapel one. But I think that her response to that situation could have been a little more even as well. And I think that she has her own hangups that she's also dealing with. And I'm not saying it's all her fault or all his fault, but there's blame on both sides here.
Haley, what about you?
To Kevin's point about Vulcans, and even when Spock is being emotional, he says Vulcans are jerks. Um, I look at it as yes, they are, but look at where their history is and look at kind of the direction that they're coming from. Vulcans are extremely logical. They're very science driven. They're very factual, very learned. And in our own society, if you look at the people who are like that, a lot of them are jerks. They're going to look down their nose at you. They're going to question what you're saying, um, how you're behaving, and whatnot, and your actions, your decisions, your choices based off of, their own thoughts and opinions and their knowledge. And so I kind of equate it as, they're just this extremely learned race, and it doesn't excuse their behavior for being jerks, but I think they hold such high opinions of themselves and such high standards of themselves that those that they want to encounter, they're forgetting that not everybody is to the same degree as them in their knowledge and in their longevity of exploring space. And I think that they tend to forget that, and that's why I think their expectations and their standards are so high that they look down on everyone because no one is meeting those standards. We look at First Contact, when Vulcans came to Earth and they visited, and realizing, oh, these puny humans have finally got this warp drive, and subsequent episodes that's talked about kind of that past history of them teaching us about things. It was in a vein of being kind, but it was also like, y'all are just stupid and you don't know anything. Let us educate you type thing. And so I think they are, the scholars and the philosophers of our history, where they have such big, grandiose ideas that they just look at humans and look at anybody else who maybe isn't quite as learned as less than, simply because their minds haven't thought, our minds haven't thought of the grandiosity that they have. T'Pring is definitely an interesting character. It's a neat contradiction. I think Sarek in their relationship with Amanda, he's very much in charge and in control of the household, right? But in this case, I mean, her husband, he's like, oh, this is great. This is so good. Well, no. And, she criticizes and she just throws in this little thing. He's like, oh, you're right. And he would get all excited about something, and then she would say something rude, and he would go, oh, you're right. That is, there is salt in that, or there is something wrong with, Captain Pike's traditional food that he learned how to cook, and I'm sure was just wonderful. But she can't even fathom that this human would be capable of doing something extraordinary and wonderful. So I found that contradiction quite interesting, to see that she basically runs their house. And to this relationship with Spock and T'Pring, I mean, we kind of all know how it goes. Let's be honest here. But I think there's a degree of Vulcan rebellion, per se, in T'Pring's choice of Spock. I think there's ambitions that they both share, which drew them together. But I think there's also this, I already know my mother would not want me to marry him, which she obviously doesn't. Even despite the fact that he passed this ritual as a human, she would not want her daughter marrying someone who is not completely full Vulcan. And so I wonder if there's just this little bit of rebellion to this, of like, I'm going to get back at my mother. And then to this thought of, of what happens at the end, where she says, I think we need to take a break. I don't know if you guys missed the look on her face when Chapel walked to the door. Oh, she knew something was up.
I'm gonna pump your brakes there just a little bit because we're going to get to that here shortly, Haley.
So it makes sense that she's like, we're taking a breather. Plus, we all know how it ends anyway.
But guys, Haley, you mentioned her a little bit here too. We've mentioned her throughout the episode. Spock's mom, played by Mia Kirshner.
That dress, smoking.
I was just gonna say that dress is hot. I love that look.
Gorgeous on her.
Yeah.
I love her in this episode because, unlike what we were talking about with T'Pryl and her husband, she, as much as she kind of gives to Sarek giving him his way, she is still working things on the undercurrent and still being strong and being the mother to Spock that Spock needs when Spock, especially when his human side is overwhelming him or he's having issues. And Mia Kirshner just relayed that strength beautifully in this episode for me. And what I loved was how she was the ambassador with everybody. I liked how she was on friendly terms with Pike and how she handled T'Pryl and in this episode with a way of kind of diffusing her, but still you could tell there was points where she was even getting frustrated, but she kept her cool. She kept her head and she played things out intelligently. And then to see her kind of be there for Spock as Spock is going through this with his humanity. And then for Spock, as the episode goes along, and then when they talk about the moment that was shared in the mind meld, Spock having an understanding about his mother that he had never had that understanding before, and that bringing him that much closer was just a beautiful moment. I'm hoping each of you guys wouldn't mind giving me a little bit of your little bit deeper thoughts on Amanda in this episode. Kevin?
Yes, I do like that we got to see Amanda show some support here. But I'll be perfectly honest with you, I wanted to see Amanda release her human side. I wanted her to put T'Pring's mother in her place a little bit more. I'll be perfectly honest with you. I like her character and I like how supportive Spock. But I would have liked her gone to bat a little bit more for her son. I don't know. Maybe she understands the diplomatic part of the situation and she's being cool about it and letting kind of Spock handle things on his own there. But I wanted her to be like the way my mom was when she pulled a bully off of me by pulling his hair back and slamming him to the ground. I wanted to see a little bit of that. So, but I did like what I saw though. I love her. I hope we see more of her.
Haley?
No, I think, she did an amazing job. I loved I'm going to teach you to lie. And Captain Pike's gonna help, and he's like, do I get a choice? And she's like, no. I think that the reason that she kind of was holding back and being reserved is she's trying to show T'Pryl, who obviously, in this episode, even, Amanda says that the reason it's not so much Spock being the reason that T'Pryl doesn't want T'Pring to marry him, it's because of his mother. And I think she was going by being reserved and by keeping her cool and being Vulcan, essentially. She elevated herself above T'Pryl. She, rather than reacting in a human way, which only would have made things worse, she did exactly the right thing in being extremely Vulcan for a human and going above and beyond and showing, hey, just because I am human doesn't mean that I can't control my emotions and doesn't mean that I can't show you how to be compassionate and be wonderful and kind of have both of these aspects to yourself, be loving while also still being logical. I think that was incredibly powerful.
I agree a lot with what you said there, Haley. I think one of the other aspects too of all that, and they mentioned this a few times in the episode, is this whole marriage arrangement was a lot of Sarek's doing as well, and it was important to Sarek. So I think that was why Amanda also kind of withheld her emotions a little bit more too, because she didn't want to dishonor her husband, who this is important to him. So I think there was a lot of that in that piece of it too. But you guys were talking about it a little bit as well, as far as the relationships in this episode, which kind of brings us to our next topic, which is the heart wants what the heart wants. And I think that was something that was a very strong message in this episode with Spock, because obviously he's had emotions for Chapel for a while now, and he gets to experience those emotions full on with his humanity in this episode. But you brought it up, Haley, so I'm gonna kind of start with you here, because you talked about when Chapel walks into the room and the look on T'Pring's face when Spock kind of goes to the back with her to get his vitamin shot. Yeah, that's.
Oh yeah, no, I'm sorry. She knew something was going on. And let's also call this the hormones want what the hormones want, because let's be honest, that scene ended, but it did not end in that way. No, I think T'Pring was reading, as a woman should, even a Vulcan woman should, into what was in that space and what was transpiring in the space between Spock and Chapel. And I think she saw that conflict in him and is giving him that space and that time to decide what he wants out of life. And I think that's very incredible. And I think as much as that hurts her, I think she's very hurt. Which, to your point, Kevin, I agree. It was kind of silly that she was letting herself be hurt that much. But it also shows that, again, there's a side of Spock that she can't relate to. And he has to be comfortable letting someone relate to that part of him on top of his Vulcan part. And if he's not going to allow T'Pring to have access to both of these sides of himself and the emotions and the feelings and the thoughts, then what else would he be capable of? That is probably her mindset. And so I think them taking a break and her being hurt and upset by it kind of makes sense, because again, she saw what was in that space between those two. And I'm excited to see what happens. I mean, going from the earlier tension of them being in the turbo lift and like not even acknowledging each other, and the look on Mbenga's face when he walks out and he's just like, seriously. And then, the same with Uhura and Ortegas, where in that inner space area, and they're like, dude, come on, really? And Chapel tells him to like turn around, as if turning around's gonna like be able to be more comfortable opening up and saying, to this being that's floating there in space, that she has feelings for Spock. It was great. So yeah, I'm excited to see what happens, and I'm glad that they're exploring this, because I think that's going to help Spock further.
The one thing I want to say about the Pring situation, while I have the idea in my head, is I honestly think she felt telling Spock what she said about being upset with him hiding it from her. Yeah, she was upset about that, but she was covering the real reason why she was upset. It was because of what she saw between Spock and Chapel.
Mm-hmm.
I think she didn't want to. I think she cares about Spock. Didn't want to hurt Spock by calling him out on that, even though she probably, if she was human, she would have in a heartbeat. But being Vulcan, that's what she did, and she did the logical, in her mind, the logical thing, and say, "Oh well, you lied to me," and Vulcan thing. But I think she was covering up her own emotions of her unhappiness, or seeing what was going on between Spock and Chapel. But Kevin, we established last week, you are the romantic on the ship. You have the heart. You have the romance. That was well established last week. So I am going to turn things over to you to let you talk about all things love and desire and everything that happened within this episode.
Yeah, I remember what I said last week to establish that.
It was all about Pike's relationship.
Yep. And me and Amy were like, and you were like,
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. Yeah. I
And then
remember
you
that.
were harping on us because we don't watch the Hallmark
Yeah,
Channel movies.
it's because you're dead inside. Got that? Yeah.
I know I am dead inside. I'm so sorry.
Love me some romance. No, I like this, and I thought that this was a clever episode to not only show what would happen when Spock finally really dives into his human side by actually making him human, but also that Nurse Chapel has feelings for him as Spock, not as human, and that her her pleading with those Krakowians that way was a really nice scene, and they were kind of dicks too. Let's be honest, the way like okay, it was kind of like I think on the Ready Room, it was a good example of how dealing with the Krakowians kind of like waiting online or waiting on a phone call. Your call is very important to us. Please wait,
Uh-huh.
or, that type of thing. And I was feeling your frustration and the whole cast, the whole crew's frustration dealing and communicating with them. But anyway, her pleading with, yeah, you didn't fix them, and here's why. Here's how I feel about it. And I'm a big fan of romance in Star Trek, and I like the fact that we actually got to see that come to fruition here, and that it at that end scene right before they kiss, we see that he's coming to her, and then she ends up in front of him, and that she kind of makes the first move, obviously, and he goes with it. Actually, kind of reminds me of when my wife and I first. Anyway, and it was a nice scene to finally see something like that happen, because it's kind of a big deal when you think about it. That it is, when it comes to romance in Star Trek, we don't see a lot of crew members falling for each other in that way. There's some flirtation, maybe. It's more of the alien or guest star of the week, quick romance type of thing, or a reoccurring thing. And so to me, when I was watching this, I'm going, okay, this is kind of a big deal, and I don't know TOS as well as some other fans do. And so when they were referencing in the Ready Room the history between these two characters, I don't remember it that well, or I don't remember any sexual tension that way between the original Spock and Chapel. But I'm liking this, and immediately I was brought to thinking of the future, like, okay, how are they going to end this? Because it has to eventually. So, but I am enjoying the ride thus far. I'm curious to see where it's going to go this season.
I will say in the original series, it's not so much you can sense the tension, but there's like little subtleties that you can tell more from Chapel's side that there's feelings there for Spock. And so if you go back, it's really subtle. It's not super pronounced, but at times you can see it. Like it's a look that she gives him, or, it's something that she does for him. So it's definitely there, but not in the same format as this, obviously, because that was the 60s.
Yeah. Okay, guys, I have one other topic, because this is something that both Kevin and I found things about in this week that I feel like there's something about the show. And my question is this: is this Strange New Worlds, or is this a Food Network show? Because this show makes me hungry. Especially this week, seeing Pike with what he's cooked for the Vulcans, what he's doing teaching Spock how to cook. There's a scene where they're in the lounge where Nurse Chapel is talking to Uhura and Ortega about helping them, and then you see the burger Ortega has from in front of her, and the sandwich, or her goes and they're like, "Can we get these to go?" And they just look so good, guys. Are we sure that in a past life Pike wasn't a Food Network star? I'm just saying.
Pike's a foodie, and I'm totally down for this. I love this. I love it. I think it is so wonderful because, I mean, you know, TNG, we get a little snippet of Riker likes to cook, but he's not a good cook. I love this concept of, hey, I'm going to do something like, yeah, I know there's replicators, but there's something to be said. I'm going to cook my own food. And he loves it and he enjoys it and he thrives on it. And it just makes his character just even that more lovable, that he wants to cook for people. There is something to be said, gents, and any gents listening. There is something to be said for a man who says, I'm cooking for you. Because I've been in 2 long-term relationships and very rarely was it I was not cooking. Just saying, it is darn sexy. There's my 2 cents.
Now, Mr. Reitzel, you also we've been around each other for so long. We get on the same wavelengths, but
before you go there, I want to talk about the Pike thing real quick here. As a cook, I like that this has been established, and Haley, you're absolutely right. Men who know how to cook is a turn on for women, and I've learned that, and I have not learned that lesson, unfortunately.
Cooking classes.
I know. Look, my wife loves to cook, and I can do the hell out of laundry, so we just call it even there. I'm just gonna say so. You know, when it comes to the food and the whole Pike thing, I love it that this is a thing, and I love the fact that he has his quarters open to these events and the food and the teaching and the learning. And the thing that's really cool about this series with him cooking is that they show the steps of him cooking, and that part makes you hungry as well, because you can almost smell what he's cooking, especially when he's talking to Spock about how you can't replicate this, you got to get it fresh and stuff like that. And it's funny too, because you mentioned replicators earlier, Kyle. I always equated replicators to yes, they can make your food, but they're more like the microwave.
mm-hmm.
You can pop it in and zap it and it's okay and it tastes good, but it's not as good as when you cook it fresh, and you go through the process and the smells and all that kind of stuff. So I like that. And I like it when you see scenes in movies or in TV shows where they actually show the process of cooking it. And one of my favorite cooking movies is Chef with Jon Favreau. He directed it and starred in it. And it's a really cool story about how he's this kind of like very prominent LA chef, and he loses his job, and it's about reconnecting with his son, and they decide to open up a taco truck, basically a food truck. And John Leguizamo is his friend, and they go on this tour, and he kind of rediscovers food, and he's teaching his son along the way. But that movie is a perfect example, and this TV show, of them actually preparing the food. And I love that they're doing that with this. I would like to know if you guys know the answer, please let me know, if this is a thing that the writers have written in for Pike, or if Anson Mount is going, look, I got some skills, let me show you what I can do. And they've kind of written this in there, because Anson seems very, very, he's a good actor. We know that. But he seems like he's a natural at this cooking thing, and I want to know if that's something that he's brought to the character. If so, kudos to him, because there's some of my favorite scenes of Star Trek Strange New Worlds. Now, back to what we were going to talk about, Kyle. Spock and bacon.
You mean that?
Yes. I absolutely love this scene, because you know how when you see memes on Facebook and people say, I can smell this picture? Well, I can smell this picture or this scene when we get Ethan Peck Spock trying bacon for the first time. And I decided to do a search online for Spock and bacon, and I found this picture on geekcrafts.com that was posted in 2013 because, as you know, and Haley mentioned it earlier, that Vulcans are vegetarians, that someone had fun with this picture of Spock looking at a piece of bacon. And Jesse, I want to give credit here. Jesse Azarin of Plainfield, Vermont, has painted 2 portraits of Spock from Star Trek TOS that are pretty interesting. He's contemplating a slice of bacon. Each of these paintings are 12 inches by 15 inches, acrylic on masonite, and are available in Jesse's Etsy shop for $250 each. And yes, Vulcans are vegetarian, so maybe that's why Spock is so interested in bacon. He has never had it before. And this was posted back in was it 2015, and so I thought that was kind of funny. That they explored this in this episode, because Spock trying bacon for the first time and him pounding it down, I'm like, oh man, don't slow up, dude. Take it. I would eat all that bacon, especially cooked by Pike.
Okay, so what the truth is, no matter what, even if you're a vegetarian, it's always better with bacon.
Okay, let me put it this way, Kyle. There was a office conversation, and I've had this conversation before. It was in the break room about, and I know I've seen it on Facebook, about if you want to get a man's attention, the smell of bacon will do it. It's one of those smells that, for me, is one of the best smells in the world, is freshly cooked bacon.
I can't lie. I'm there with you. So, Haley, is it the same for women, or is it? Give us the female perspective.
I guess it depends. I mean, I do like the smell of bacon, but unfortunately, because I grew up in Idaho, I prefer bacon. And if any listeners have experienced this,
sprinkled on top of a nice prepared potato.
Nope.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. Your bacon.
Oh gosh, no.
You said Idaho, so you got me going there.
know,
I love that
potatoes,
too.
Right? No. The best way to have bacon is prepared in a big Dutch oven. So there's just a whole bunch of bacon, and the Dutch oven is seasoned just right because it's been used for a really long time, and it's cooked over coals from the fire. That is the best bacon you will ever have. It is better than bacon from the microwave, better than bacon in the oven, better than bacon in the stovetop. That is really the only time I will ever eat bacon, is when I'm up camping and it's this big giant Dutch oven chock full of bacon that's just been cooked over coals that are there is something about it. And if you've ever experienced it, please let me know, because I'm sure you will probably agree with me that Dutch oven bacon is the best way to have bacon.
Kevin,
bacon is not.
I can't say for sure. Just to let you know, Haley, because every time you said Dutch oven, I kept giggling inside, because Dutch oven to me means something else.
I don't
Cast iron, big giant cast iron thing.
I know what that is, but to me, Dutch oven came to me first in another way.
I don't know. I'm feeling Haley's being a little bacon snobbish here. I'm just saying.
Having bacon on a cast iron skillet, popping away with the grease. That's the best way to do bacon right there.
Well, and I mean, you think about it.
Because seeing it cooked like that and seeing the grease pop up and maybe even spray and land on your arm, that is the way to see bacon cooking.
So, I mean, I am not a full vegetarian, but I definitely don't eat a ton of meat. And so this was fun to see Spock downing bacon, because I will definitely pile on the bacon when I'm up camping and it's been cooked in the Dutch oven, because it really is. And pancakes that are cooked on the griddle that's seasoned, and the eggs, it's just like the best thing ever. But I don't do it at home. I don't cook bacon at home because I don't eat a lot of meat. And so I can definitely ascribe to Spock in this way. But again, I love it. I think that this is just wonderful. I think it's funny, because there are those smells that really just get to you and you're like, oh man, that smells so good. For me, it's Italian food, the garlic and the basil and the pesto and thyme and oregano. Those are what get me.
Okay. I am getting hungry, So I'm going to activate the transporter so I can grab a quick snack and we can get into away mission number 2. Okay, guys, it is time for our second away mission, which means it is time for some Star Trek trivia, ladies and gentlemen. I hate it when the view screen acts up, but I think the view screen even wanted bacon after our last conversation. So we have some fun trivia and Easter eggs for this episode. A little fun piece of trivia here. Christine is preparing for her internship by reciting the Corby principles of archaeology. This is a reference to Roger Corby, the famed archaeologist to whom Christine will become engaged in the original series continuity, and whom we will see in the episode What Are Little Girls Made Of?
Oh, yeah. I forgot about that. Nice one.
But we also have some Easter eggs as well, and I found this one very fun. A beanie on the edge of forever. While the beanie may seem like an odd choice of headwear for Spock, longtime fans will get right away that it's a nice tip of the knitted cap to a classic episode of Star Trek, the original series. It's essentially a reversal of Spock's situation from City on the Edge of Forever, the iconic time travel episode that sent Kirk and Spock back to 1960s New York City. There, Spock had to hide his Vulcan ears from unsuspecting 20th century humans, using a similar knitted cap to cover his pointed lobes. But that is not all the trivia we have, because a genetic disadvantage. When T'Pring's mother notes that Spock is forced to deal with what she calls a genetic disadvantage, referring to Amanda Grayson, it feels very much like a reference to a moment in the J.J. Abrams 2009 reboot film. In that movie, audiences get to see a flashback to Spock's youth. As a young child, he is faced with bullying from other Vulcan children over his human parentage, but it's upon his application to the Vulcan Science Academy that the biggest confrontation occurs. Just like in Charades, one of the officers at the Academy, played by the late W. Morgan Shepard, chides him for his ability to overcome his genetic disadvantage. The younger Spock, played by Zachary Quinto, just like Spock in Charades, decides not to accept the criticism with emotionless detachment as a good Vulcan should, but to defiantly push back in defense of his mother, Amanda Grayson. Also, Spock needs some help with human body odor. Apparently, maybe Axe body spray is too strong, but this is a callback to Star Trek Enterprise nasal suppressants, which were first used by Science Officer T'Pol, the first Vulcan to serve aboard a human vessel. We learned that 2 Vulcans who have an enhanced sense of smell the odors of humans is too pungent to tolerate. Thus, T'Pol uses what are then referred to as nasal numbing agents to be able to more easily endure her time in their presence. The nasal numbing agents get their first mention in the Enterprise episode, the Andorian incident, where it is mentioned that there are periodic injections to reduce her sensitivity to the human body odor. Unfortunately, during the story, she's held hostage by a group of Andorians alongside Captain Archer, during which her time does wear off and she's forced to stomach his horrific stench without it. Kevin, you got your hand up. You got things to say here.
Yeah, I giggled when you mentioned Axe body spray, and Haley shuddered. And I just want to talk on that for a moment, because I thought it was kind of funny, because we're doing on the network, we have a show called Time Warp, where we look back on a year of movies. And in between the movies, we talk about the pop culture, the news, the other things that were introduced during that time of the year. And we're talking about 1983 this year, because it's the 40th anniversary of everything in 1983 that happened, because this being 2023 now. So it's kind of a fun time to look back. And one of the products that was introduced in 1983 was Axe body spray. And I just want to go on record saying I remember Axe body spray becoming a thing for myself and my friends during high school and after graduating high school. I was never a fan of Axe body spray. I was never a fan also of cologne personally. And I want to apologize on behalf of my fellow males who have used Axe body spray and have used too much of it.
Oh, Lord.
Oh my God. I've seen guys do this. Shh. all over, and even for me, it's too much. And you know who you are.
Hey,
If
Haley, you look like you have thoughts.
Yeah, so I have vague memories of Axe body spray when I was in high school. I don't remember it being a thing when I was younger. But when I hit college, when I went back to college, if I can smell you entering the building before you actually enter the building, you have used too much mother effing Axe body spray. If I can taste it after you have left the room and it's an open air building, you have used too much Axe body spray. Just stop. I would have loved to have nasal suppressants when I was in college. Those 5 years of having to deal with 20-year-old dudes just zhuzhing themselves, like bathing in it. My dudes.
I want
Stop.
to apologize for that because that was a thing, and I felt it was overused to cover up BO. And I do have a small confession to make. I did use Axe deodorant, underarm deodorant.
That's different.
A few times. And then I went off from that. But yeah, I saw guys abusing that Axe body spray, and I don't know if it's one of those things where, like, if a human is dating a Vulcan, do humans know that, and do they put on their own version of a thing so they don't smell as bad, or is it up to Vulcans to always use this thing with whatever that they're doing?
I don't think I think the Vulcans don't have a choice. But I also, I will denounce anybody who uses the "I'm covering myself in Axe over taking a shower" method. I live in Florida, which means older population, and some of these older ladies like their perfume. And they really like their perfume. And I have had times with clients that, I have to go brush my teeth after because I can taste it.
Ugh. And it's always musky, isn't it?
Musky, or just so strong that it's almost like my eyes are watering. So I just want, I want to be of equality here and say, the females just do it just like the men do it. But there is no substitute for a good shower. Just remember.
Everyone just remember, you use a little, you put it on your collarbone, inside your elbows, and behind your knees. That's it. Just one little squirt in those places will be way more attractive than bathing in it.
Yeah, but the problem is, for most guys, one little squirt equals half the bottle.
It's a and release. That's it. Not a release. Yeah. Please stop.
Okay, guys, it's time to warp out of our away missions. It's time to talk a little bit of the Ready Room. So, once again, Will Wheaton is back hosting the Ready Room this week. He is blessed by the presence of our own Christine Chapel herself, Jess Bush, as he and her discuss being inspired by her character and what the future holds for Chapel. Plus, they go in depth on Vulcan writing rituals, discovering Spock's human side, and much, much more in this week's episode of the Ready Room. Guys, what did you enjoy, or what did you pull out of the Ready Room this week? Kevin, I'll start with you.
I love the prop masters getting a call out in this, and also the costume designers talking about that. I got a lot out of that. I thought that was really, really cool. The Jess Bush interview was great too. I liked when Will was talking to her and her character Chapel and Mbega's background during the Klingon War, and that they got to kick some ass and stuff. And I like that these two medical professionals that work together have this kind of badass military background, sort of, being in the thick of things. And I thought that was really, really cool. And I like too that she got to kind of explore this character's relationship a little bit more that we didn't really get to see in the TOS series, and this character in general, basically, because we didn't really get a lot, exploration of Nurse Chapel, and I like that they recognized that Magil wanted more of that, and that didn't happen, but that we did that Jess's character portrayal of Chapel is getting a chance to do that, and I think that was really, really cool. So
Haley, what about you? What did you pull from this week's episode of the Ready Room?
Yeah, I really loved this concept of, these Vulcan wedding rituals, because it makes sense that every society would have them, and granted, that's not necessarily anthropomorphizing, because that's equating human qualities to something that's an inanimate object or an animal. But this idea that these other races that we would encounter would have their own traditions regarding weddings, and kind of looking back on, the fight when Spock and Kirk are fighting each other, and the bells. I love, like, the music from that episode is just wonderful. So I really liked this idea of looking back on what was past, and then how they've translated that and moved that forward.
I'm with you, Kevin. I love the prop master segment in this. It's always nice when they get the behind the scenes looks like that. I love the interview with Jess. I love the fact that they focused on so many different things with Chapel's character. They didn't just focus on what happened in this episode and the Spock relationship. In fact, they really didn't even dive into that until much later in the interview. I liked the fact they talked about her being part of the Klingon War and the effects it had on her. Obviously, the question of the Ready Room this year for the season of Strange New Worlds, they've all been asked, is how amazed they are by the reaction to season one. Again, she just talks about how much she loved the fans. But I also love the fact that they talked about having to film the one scene like months later, and her having to retap into that. And I found that to be very amazing. And you can see Will Wheaton's mind was just kind of blown by that and the acting ability that takes. And I love the fact she was just so excited she got to keep that secret for so long and couldn't wait to hear from people online after the revealing of the kiss with Spock. But
one of the things that I always enjoy, and you just touched on it, and I wanted to indulge on it a little bit more, is her first reaction to fans, and it was the Star Trek Las Vegas convention, and the response that she got, and I love it when they interview the newer members of Star Trek or the Star Trek family, and they share those moments of first interaction with fans, because they may be told up front, like, hey, now that you're part of Trek, here's an idea of what you can expect. But when you experience it for the first time, I can only imagine what they're going through. But being on the other side of the fence and being in a convention or whatever it is, that is where you see this new star that you've come to love in whatever show, not just Star Trek, and then seeing the reaction from the fans. And one of the most, and I just want to share a quick little personal story, is Kyle, remind me the name of the actor. I think Don was his first name in Star Trek. Stargate. He was the general.
Don Davis.
Don Davis, yeah. I remember seeing him in a panel, and he got so choked up on a question that a fan had asked about, the response the fans to him and stuff like that, and how he felt, and he started to cry. And I thought that was a really nice, touching moment from him, because he wouldn't be where he is if it wasn't for the fans, and that the fan responses that he gets keeps him going, and it keeps him going to these conventions. And you can tell it really meant a lot to him to be there for the fans. And when I think back at that moment, it hit a little hard for me, because he passed away like a year or two later after that convention appearance. And it reminds me of what they go as, because we forget, they may be stars to us, but they're humans too. And I just like it when Will asked Jess that, and she got to experience that for the first time, and that must have been quite a moment for her.
No, I remember that with Don Davis because I remember that actually that speech made the internet rounds for a bit too, and
Yeah.
he was beloved anyway, and that just sealed it for a lot of people. So I'm going to ask you guys real quick: did either of you watch the clip for next week's episode?
I did by accident.
Nope.
The remote was over there, and I was sitting back, and it just came on. I was just like, all right, fine.
Well, there's definitely something weird happening on the Enterprise for next week. I'll just leave it at that.
Yeah, it didn't. It just kind of spoiled a reoccurring character, and it didn't really like
Doesn't matter.
too much. So I'm not going to say anything. But I'm glad for me because lately I've been, like I said last week, I'm trying to not watch them. But I'm glad that it didn't spoil much. So.
Well, guys, it is time to wrap up this episode of Strange New Worlds. I want to thank Red and Silver and Black for being part of this week's episode. It was a lot of fun and a very fun episode to discuss. But before we close out, it's time to hit some subspace signals. Of course, if you're watching this episode of the Union Federation, it means you're watching it on the Fandom Podcast Network YouTube channel. We can't thank you guys enough for being part of it. And please remember to subscribe, like, and share it out. If you're listening to this on audio, you're listening it to either on the amazing feed that is the Fandom Podcast Network feed, or maybe you're listening to it on our partners, the BQN. And Amy, of course, is getting ready for Star Trek Las Vegas, along with a lot of the members of the BQN. So I suspect they're going to have some really good podcasts coming up after Star Trek Las Vegas with some of the things to talk about there. But before we get into some art where you can find us, a little Orb of Prophecy. Obviously, we've got Star Trek Strange New World Season 2, Episode 6, Lost in Translation next week. But coming up ahead, too, we still have Season 4 of Lower Decks, the final season of Discovery in 2024, possibly Starfleet Academy, maybe Legacy. Of course, right now we're not looking at much of anything the way things are in Hollywood at the moment. But
yeah, I'd put all of these in big question mark now, since both the actors and the writers are on strike right now. So
yeah. But you know what? Well, we're still going to be here talking about these things, and trust me, we got a lot of fun things to talk about ahead. I know that one Strange New World is up. Season is up. I think we might be going back and revisiting some Orville things. We got to get our Orville fix back too, but we'll keep you updated on those things. But of course, you can find the master feed for all the great podcasts on the Fandom Podcast Network at fpnet.podbean.com, and you can find the Union Federation and the FPNet feed also on all your major podcast catchers, whether it's iTunes, iHeartRadio, Spotify, all the great ones out there. If you'd like to join us directly, you can always email us at the unionfederation@gmail.com. You can find me, Kyle, on Twitter at AKyleW, or on Instagram and Threads at AKyleFandom. Kevin, where can people find you?
You can find me at Spartan_Phoenix on Twitter, Instagram, and now Threads.
And Miss Haley, where can people get educated with your amazing science facts?
You can find me on Twitter. I am at Trekkie01D, and Instagram at Trekkie01D. It's crazy. I finally jumped on, I guess. I don't know.
Well, welcome to the club.
Thank you.
Of course, you can find Amy on Twitter at Miss Amy Nelson, and you can find the BQN on Facebook, on all your major podcast catchers as well. Guys, it has been an absolute pleasure. It's been a lot of fun. Cannot wait until next week when we talk some more Strange New Worlds. But until then, hailing frequencies are now closed.